Morning. So, yeah, we're here to talk about how business can speed up and help fibre deployment. So my name's Simon Roberts. I'm with PPC Broadband and joined by Simon Harvey from Fibreco and Calvin Govinda from MTN. So I guess as by means of a prelude, we were just having a chat before and we were wondering what the role of business is. And personally, I mean, it's to make profit. It's to provide a service, but ultimately it's to return an investment for the shareholders. So with that in mind, you know, we also are thinking, well, fibre at the end of the day is a utility. I think Comscope touched on it yesterday where they were saying it essentially is like having gas or water. You know, we have a phone line at the moment. It works. We all get a telecom line. It's a 2 or 4 meg connection. So do we need fibre? And I think it's quite interesting today to probably just explore a little bit more about what does it do for us, as well as what the role of business is. So by means, really, I think we kind of broke it down into little sections. So we thought we'd start by looking at, is there a way of standardizing fibre deployment? So I think when we go and deploy, the room is full of different vendors that have different ideas and different solutions. We're joined by 2 gentlemen that deploy networks and a lot of people in the audience that also deploy and use the network. So I guess, Calvin, maybe start with you, if I may. Just what's your views in terms of having almost like a copy and paste model where an MTN, a Vodacom, a Fibreco can go to the municipality and say, look, this is what I'm doing. Essentially what I want to do is I want to take this network and I want to go and put it here. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, maybe I'll start by saying good morning, everyone. I think standardization is something that is happening or will continue to happen as we go forward. I guess as an industry, there's a lot of learning that actually comes out of every single project that we actually do. I think it's almost a cognitive process, so the learning will continue to happen. And it's forums like this where we actually share ideas and lessons learned from deployment of fibre, not just to the home, but fibre to the X. So in terms of standardization, I think what will happen is we will start to develop the standards as an industry, but I guess it's all based on how open we are to share some of the ideas. Hello? Yeah. To share some of the ideas that we actually have and to be open and honest in the challenges we experience as an industry. Yeah, so I think effectively we as an industry will set these standards. There's certain elements of the design, for example, like when it comes to, let's just say, the OSP component, the spec in terms of what we actually do should be standardized in the sense of how, the trench depth, looking at what sort of fiber tubes we put in, etc. And that'll actually inform the municipalities, for example, one of the stakeholders that we often engage with, on how we can actually then fast track the approval process. I do accept that there will be some form of uniqueness in the designs, but I guess the element of that unique component will be very small compared to what will be, the standard part of the design. So the blueprints will actually be there, and I guess it's something that shouldn't be the differentiator between us and our competitors or amongst the players in the space. It should be almost seen as something that's easily shared amongst the operators.
And do you think there'll be a cross-connect in terms of what you do and what Vodacom do and what Simon might do at Fibreco? Do you think you'll ever get together and say, do you know what, guys, this is the way that we build networks, let's all do the same?
Yeah, look, I do see that happening, and I think that the reality is that there is no secrets, or there's very little secrets in the industry today. And the reality, if we're competing at that level, then fundamentally we've actually missed the essence of what we're trying to achieve. I guess having that open and honest discussion amongst the operators at that level will accelerate what we're trying to achieve. There's many other areas of what we're trying to achieve that we can compete on, but I firmly believe this is not one of the areas.
Yeah, no, I think I would tend to agree. I mean, there's always going to be variations, which probably leads us to the next question. It's one of my personal favourites because I think we're all in the same game of providing a service. And I think what we always miss out on is that it's about the quality of service to the customer, and it's about giving a pipe that the customer can then do what he wants with it. I'm always reminded that with great power comes great responsibility, which is a quote by Spider-Man, by the way, nobody famous. And I think open access is probably the key to all of this. You know, I mean, we do a lot of work with Liquid Telecom, and I know their network is completely open. You can come and take what you want. But at the same time, going back to my old mobile days, you know, the network was seen as an asset. So if you don't own that asset and you don't own the network, there's always a reliability that, you know what, if that pipe gets squeezed, you know, maybe Simon's not going to give me the capacity that I need. So, I mean, what do you think, Simon, in terms of open access as a way of leveraging that speed of deployment and getting business involved?
So I guess from a Fibreco point of view, we are an open access entity, and we were built and developed to be an open access entity. So we firmly believe in that philosophy. And in fact, I still think that's the right philosophy. I don't believe that operators or government should be building networks. I think it should be open access providers that are building out, specifically on a fiber network where business models are quite tight and the business cases are difficult to achieve. I do think that an open access entity deploys networks a lot quicker than consortium models or co-builds. I do think that open access providers makes their network completely open. I mean, just like you said around Liquid, we do exactly the same. We make all of our infrastructure open. We do put services on top of it. We don't do the services that our customers usually provide, but we certainly make all of our infrastructure open and on a basis that it's all equal. And at a cheaper price than those operators and governments and the like can actually do it themselves. So from our point of view, we do believe open access is the right way to go. We do believe it's a better, more cost-effective and quicker way of deploying fiber, and we stick to that philosophy.
Would you agree, Calvin? As an MTN guy, I can probably twist you a little bit. Would you go along that model, or historically you've always put your own infrastructure, your own network, and you've gone first to market, as I guess Simon would, and the likes of Vumatel and Link Africa that we enjoy service from?
I guess as MTN, we maybe I'll go as far as saying I think share the same views as most of the operators that in terms of actually being first to market and capturing the customer base, it's something we will want to do. So it is the first option, to be honest. I think the reality is that we may not actually have that luxury in most cases. So to maybe accelerate the, let's just say the fiber penetration, the open access model is something which I guess by default will be forced by the industry or the customers that we want to service. In terms of our, trying to actually manage it, I guess the reality is that as any model out there that we put, it's got to be done in a manner that doesn't actually impede or benefit one party unfairly or fairly. So I guess that the reality is that...
you're right the first time.
Yeah. So for us, we want to, I guess we embrace it, but it's got to be within a framework that sort of creates a very level, fair playing field for all operators. And if that fairness is there, then yes, by all means, I see it as something that will actually move forward.
So conventionally, that sounds quite a cool idea, because now you're thinking fibre hoods go in, they cover a suburb, and then they say, right, it's open access to anybody that wants it. How do you then drive that? Because as a consumer, as we all are consumers, you're looking for the best deal. Does it then become a price which you trade off the quality of service? Or if you've both got access to the pipe, how do you then define the business model without effectively being a consortium, which the regulator might come down against you? I mean, what do you think on that one, Simon?
I think if you've got the same underlying cost structure, then it's more important for you to concentrate on the quality of the services that you put on that infrastructure, but also the sales and marketing that you put together. I think that a lot of service providers and operators and the like spend too much time trying to understand the underlying kind of technologies of infrastructure and not enough time on marketing and actually trying to go after the client. I think some of these, even the FTTH deployments, the take-up just isn't as much as people would have thought that take-up was. And I think that if the ISPs and the like spend more time trying to actually capture the client base, which we know is there, I mean, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here rolling out fiber. So we know the demand is there. But I think if if the service providers and the operators had to spend more time on product mix, on marketing and those kind of things, and on pricing, I think we'd get a lot better uptake.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think if there's a convergence of pricing and service, ultimately it's got to be better for the consumer. Would you tend to agree, Calvin?
Yeah, I guess the reality is that we, if you look at the competitive landscape, for me, at the product level, is where the creativity really comes in. And being able to market that to your customer base and differentiate on products is where I think it'll separate the winner from the loser in terms of capturing market share. And in terms of the cost base, I mean, as Simon actually mentioned, pretty much I guess it's sort of at a point where it's a level playing field. Maybe it's a slight deviation in some elements, but overall the cost that we actually incur is pretty much a known fact, and it's the same experience by all operators. So the real differentiation is going to be on the product level, and how do we actually then carve out those segments, and maybe more certain operators will look at targeting a certain specific segment where you're actually good. So you actually become better at what you're good at instead of actually trying to target the entire base where you may actually water down your value proposition. So for an operator, it's important to find your space in the market where you have the most, let's just say, value that you can add to your customer. And I believe firmly that the industry is big enough that this is going to be shared amongst many operators.
So the big question, I guess, is how do you take that philosophy and go and compete with a telcom? So, I mean, if we're honest, Telcom give us a 2 or 4 meg connection. They've got 99% of the households covered. If I'm Telcom, I'm not going to want to share with an MTN or with a Vodacom, or I don't want Fiberhoods or Vumatel coming to dig up my network, because actually I'm already prevalent. Is there a role or a potential synergy that you see with a Telcom? Because if you don't have Telcom on board, fundamentally your business case falls over, and therefore you're still competing. So the market's still open, and then it becomes a land grab, and it's the same as where we are today, which I think if I look at the statistics of uptake, once fiber's deployed, it's still somewhere between 10 to 15% on the initial uptake, so it's still very low. So the return on investment is still quite a long period. Do you think there's ever a possibility that Telcom will entertain an open access or a shared network? I guess probably Kelvin, as an MTN guy, you must be good friends with Telcom and really talk about this quite a lot.
Yeah, look, I think fundamentally there's a big difference between what Telcom wants to do and what they need to do. I guess the reality is that the market will actually lean towards what needs to be done. And I guess for me, it's a question of, if we're competing at that level, it's not going to be sustainable. So effectively, the open access play is something that, it's going to be there. And I guess, again, to my earlier point, it's got to be at a point where it's actually fair, not just to the other operators, but also to the customer itself. Because fundamentally, if the model actually doesn't actually achieve what it's meant to achieve, the customer is not going to benefit from what we're trying to do, both from a quality perspective, time to market, price perspective. So I guess it's going to be a situation where the customers will actually facilitate the need for this to actually happen.
Yeah. What do you think the driver will be? I mean, we all get Google Play and Amazon Prime and Netflix. Do you think there's ever a possibility that those content providers, like Google have done in Uganda and other examples, do you think there's ever a possibility they'll come here, Simon, and want to contribute financially to these network deployments?
I think they would. I think that there's pockets of interest that they've had before. They certainly have done 1 or 2 projects where they've tried to roll out, specifically more in the rural areas where they've tried to create that kind of connectivity out there. I must say, though, that I think that because South Africa's infrastructure landscape is better than some of the other African countries, I think they're less likely to look at South Africa as a place to kind of open up some of the infrastructure and more likely to look at other places, like you mentioned, Ghana and those kind of places. I think that that's where a lot of the content providers will invest, because they can see that from a South Africa point of view, as an industry, we've done quite well at rolling out fibre. I think there's a lot of work still to do, but there's good, healthy competition. The price points are getting to where they need to get to. The undersea capacity is starting to come on stream quite nicely. The terrestrial networks are growing quite a lot. So I think that there's quite a lot of investment from the from the private sector point of view. And I think that content providers are just leveraging that. I believe Microsoft is looking at bringing content as well. The other providers, Amazon and Google, I think, will be here quite soon as well. So I think that they're using a mature market to be able to deliver their service. And I can't see, apart from perhaps in some of the rural initiatives, I can't see them developing large initiatives like they've done in some of the other African countries.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And because from an MTN perspective, you must, when you see the Amazon or the Google, they make more money than you do for selling the service. Do you ever see that there's a potential to get these guys on board, or are they just simply not interested because they're selling their service and actually you're going to do the build for them regardless?
Yeah. So I guess for MTN, we look at it more as a service that's actually required by our customers, and we, as an operator, will actually build infrastructure where it's feasible, makes business sense to actually build. And to Simon's point, there will be areas where it may not be feasible to build it now, so we may actually defer that build. And I guess that's the part of the network where you find the likes of the Googles that maybe want to invest to actually build infrastructure out there. So it's something that maybe a discussion that we need to have with these guys to maybe look at how can we jointly actually benefit each other and the customer, overall on this issue.
Yeah, because I guess if you're a Google, the quicker you build it, the quicker they can provide services, yeah. Or if I'm a Netflix or any of these secondary services, but I suppose you've got so many going that are delivering content, yeah. They're not all going to chip in. They're probably going to wait and see what happens, which ultimately doesn't benefit us as consumers.
Correct.
So taking that thought just a stage further, do you think there's also a play with land providers? So I mean, let's say if I own a community or I own a suburb, in terms of the infrastructure, as in the mobile world, you put the tower, you pay a yearly rental. Do you think there's a play, I'm kind of thinking a bit left field, but do you think there's a play in terms of working with those guys to get them to part sponsor or get them to part invest in getting fibre? Because ultimately what you want to do is have a drop-off point. Even if you've got a high-capacity Wi-Fi or you've got something hanging off it, you want to have that drop-off point and break out either with GPON or PON, whatever you're going to do. Do you think there's a play to sort of get those guys to work with you as well? Calvin, maybe?
Yeah, look, I get, for me, the whole concept of the precinct model is something which is a reality. And you find that, the sort of private homeowners or the multi-dwelling unit setup, we have the situation where, the homeowners or the property owners are actually looking at some form of model where they own the last drop. I guess in terms of the model, I believe there's a lot more work that can be done to try and, let's just say, not impede what we're trying to achieve. Often you find that there's no standard in the market today, and it sort of varies from one property owner to another. And maybe if that model is actually framed a bit more, to a point where it becomes almost like an industry standard, it's something that will actually become, a reality going forward.
How would you go about doing that?
So I guess, it all comes down to looking at the overall ecosystem of the fiber to the home, and looking at the cost base of what we actually sitting at, looking at the complexities of actually building fiber, and at the end of the day, the return on investment needs to be there, because if the framework actually yields a negative return, then there's going to be an element of reluctance from the operators to actually build. And if we reach that point, then fundamentally we've actually failed as an industry. But so for me, there's lots of components to it, but it's got to be a discussion at a level where it shouldn't be unrealistic demands, and I use the word demand quite strongly, from the other stakeholders. It should be something that's actually done within the whole idea of actually putting together a positive business case that will be a return on investment for not just the property owners or the operator, but for all stakeholders in that ecosystem.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very good point. I mean, it probably leads us on to the return investment, because I think the biggest challenge that you guys have as MTN and as Fibreco as well in putting in the dark fibre is how do you get that return on investment? I mean, the business case is probably what's going to drive the uptake. But if you've got low-digit uptake, sort of 8, 10, 12, 15% for the initial round once the fibre's in the ground, your return on investment starts to stretch to, what's that's going to be, 8 to 9 years. As an old microwave guy, I mean, I used to compete against fibre and we'd win 9 times out of 10. But it seems that the tide has turned because companies like Fibreco and DFA, and I guess MTN as well, you've got that big boy fibre in the ground now, and you've got the capacity. In terms of your return on investment, Simon, I mean, do you see that now as a shorter term than it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago?
No, I don't think so, because the infrastructure that we put in the ground, we always run on longer-term business cases. It's always one of those conservative business cases that you put in to actually get the project off the ground, and you always work to improving on that business case. But I don't think that the fibre infrastructure, as it gets rolled out at the moment, has got. I don't think that the investment in fibre is significantly attractive. I think that as we roll out fibre, we look at longer terms. We look at reducing revenues. Certainly, if you talk about houses passed or buildings passed, the return is coming down quite a lot, because the services that get sold are starting to become more of a utility-based pricing model. And on that basis, the fibre or the infrastructure needs to be looked at a longer period of time. And we've certainly seen that in some of the projects that we're going to be rolling out in the next year. We're looking at a longer-term view. We're looking at infrastructure more as a property investment, where we take a longer-term view. We know that we're going to get a certain return, but we're of the view that fibre is a long-term asset. It's got a long-term life to it, and on that basis, we're looking at more predictable returns, perhaps not as attractive as some of the services out there, but we're certainly looking at rolling out infrastructure, long-term predictable returns. If there's fibre in the ground and it connects a home, and we're the infrastructure provider, we don't expect that fibre to be swapped from one provider to another. I think that there will be different service providers sitting on top of it. I mean, remember, we're an open access provider, so any ISP can connect on our network. So from our point of view, we look at a longer term investment. We took a look at almost a property view around, we're owning the property connection, but we certainly take a longer term view of that investment.
Because I think that's a very good point, because you've got different business models. I mean, you're obviously got the fibre and Calvin's got the home connects. I mean, every time you connect a customer, you start to generate revenue. Do you find that your business model is likely to be different, Calvin, in terms of what Simon's saying? Because as a going concern, you must be looking for a return on investment much shorter than Fibreco is looking for a return.
Yeah. So I believe that the winning sort of formula will be to look at the fibre to the home as part of the overall company strategy, and to have a standalone strategy for fibre to the home that it's divorced from what you're doing as a company, at a holistic level, will actually kill the business case for fibre. So the point I'm trying to make is that for me, fibre actually forms part of the bigger ecosystem in terms of the broadband play. So for example, a mobile operator, is still looking at wireless broadband, or looking at LTE Advanced as a broadband penetration strategy. So
you're not allowed to say that, by the way.
Sorry?
We're the fibre conference.
Yeah. But I guess the enabler, be it fibre, copper, or wireless, needs to be looked at holistically. And there's certain areas of the network that you'll need that offload to be able to cross-subsidize what you're trying to achieve in terms of your overall broadband strategy. So it's part of the broadband strategy. It's not a standalone strategy. And if it's seen as a standalone strategy, it might be a very difficult business case to try and actually get approved and to be able to sell this. But as part of the overall strategy for broadband, it will be complementing, or it will be the forerunner to a larger extent of what we want to achieve.
So taking that a stage further then, you start and see a convergence between what NTN do in terms of mobile and fixed, bringing that into almost a one network play?
100%. I guess the whole convergence is something it's a reality. It has to happen. For a customer, the end objective is to actually have a single service that's being provided over any medium, and to have a single bill at the end of the month for the service that has been procured, whether it's mobile or fixed. So the whole convergence is something that is a requirement from the industry today, and I think we may be slightly behind the curve in terms of what we want to achieve. And for me, the convergence is what will actually start to open up the industry for the digital services that we want to actually enable. And I think maybe to some extent, the whole digital play is actually being slowed down to a large extent because of the lack of convergence.
Which of course doesn't really work for open access and sharing your network, but no, I mean, I think it's a very good point. I mean, as a personal note, I've always thought that the convergence is the way to go, but the mobile guys have always been very distinct and separate from the fixed guys. But ultimately, fibre, as we've discussed, is the only technology that will do 5G backhaul. Yeah. The capacities that 5G, I mean, even combined 3G, 4G sites, now you've got to have fibre. So 5G will be the enabler for that convergence. Simon, I mean, that's, in terms of what you guys do you see that convergence model being a benefit to you, or do you see that taking away your core value?
Well, I guess we see it slightly different in that we have a view of the wireless arena, and the wireless includes Wi-Fi as well as LTE technologies as well as microwave. So from our point of view, we know that the only way to backhaul is through fibre. But we also know that access technology doesn't always have to be fibre. You can get wireless technologies, and certainly when it's more cost-effective, or whether it's more rural, or it could even be for some other bespoke reason, like a backup or something of that nature. I certainly do see fibre always connecting to the tower infrastructure and backhauling from that side. I think even if wireless technology increases in time, I can't see it taking the capacities that fibre has got. Certainly when you look at the amount of capacity coming from an undersea point of view, you're always going to have to use fibre to distribute that capacity. So from our point of view, we certainly do see a hybrid model going forward, and we don't think that will change. I do think that the more and more towers that go up, the more and more fibre will be needed to connect up those towers.
I suppose with the inception of small cells as well, or lamppost type furniture, yeah, ultimately you're going to take fibre to those because microwave just isn't an option.
Correct.
So do you think that becomes then a quality of service issue as well? Because if you're delivering a business and you want to have higher fibre penetration and higher fibre uptake, do you think there'll ever be a model where you'll have varying levels of degrees of service on fibre? I mean, if I look at one of my customers in the UAE when we work with Etisalat, they have the highest fibre penetration in the world. It's about 85%. But they do the service of configuration so that their basic packing, for example, is 25 megabits. Now, for me, with 2 kids at home, we can't get through 25 megabits. And I'm always, it's probably a little bit cynical sat in front of a fibre arena, but I wonder why we need gigabit connections. I mean, my son will be playing an online game, my daughter will be watching a movie, I'll be working, and we still can't burn through 20 meg. So I kind of wonder why the business has said, yeah, we need to have a gig here, we need this, we need that. I wonder where you guys maybe sit in the fence in terms of what we actually need to provide us. Because I think a gig to a home for me is 950 megabits too much. And I just wonder why we talk about such high numbers when actually 99% of the population uses a Telkom 2 meg connection? Calvin.
I guess it's a necessary evil, I guess, to actually look at, in the sense that the reality is that, as you mentioned, the sort of average throughput being seen today is around 10 megabits. And that's the reason why you find that other technologies seem to be keeping up with the likes of fiber, and to some extent maybe watering down the real need for fiber. So if you're looking at 500 megs or 1 gig to a home today, by default it will eliminate a lot of the other technologies. But I guess that window, to actually get to the 1 gig, it's like saying how long is a piece of string. But in my honest estimation, we're talking maybe in the next year or maybe year and a half, maybe not to 1 gig, but with capacities way above 10 meg. I guess in terms of the fiber deployment, it's futuristic. I mean, obviously, you make an initial investment now, and it'll get you to the 10 gig level if required. So, it's a better investment. It's a safer investment, should I say? But in terms of how the speed at which we get there to invest that capex is where the big question mark is today. And I think many operators are trying to spread out the investment as far as possible. But in terms of quality, I mean, undoubtedly, your quality is far better on the fiber. With other technologies, it's more, you're literally reaching the peak of what you want to achieve, whereas with fiber, you're literally on the bottom end of what you want to achieve. So, it's a better quality of service on the fiber.
And Simon, do you think there's a play also then with, following on from what Calvin's saying there, that if you've got the pipe going in, do you then offer different levels of service to people that may be doing some sort of social responsibility or moral responsibility, connecting some of the townships where they know that they haven't have the disposable incomes that you might do in the city? Is there a play that sort of says, actually, we can put fibre in here and we'll give you a service which is not of the same quality? It's different, obviously, with microwave because you're further away and nearer. But is it then a play that you have a social responsibility to help people with a network, but it becomes a non-profit, so therefore you drop the quality?
I don't think you drop the quality. I think that there's I guess the good thing about fiber is that the quality of the fiber, it's a good quality, it's a future-proofed technology. I think that the fiber service that you're going to get out is generally going to be the same. I mean, you would have to degrade the fiber to be able to give a poorer quality of service, in my opinion. So when you deliver a service, you give a good service. And if you change a service level, chances are you're not going to change anything but the price. There might be a return or a turnaround time for when you go and fix it. So perhaps an operator like MTN might demand let's say a 4-hour fix, but a household you might do next business day. There might be that kind of change. But I don't think that from a pure quality of service point of view, I don't think that there's a big change, but I do think that there is a requirement for an industry like ourselves to be able to deliver social services or more invest more in the social environment. I do think, for instance, where some of the universities are struggling with the fees must fall, I do think that they need help to be able to deliver capacity, because one of the reasons why, one of the areas that some of the universities are looking at is they're looking at pushing the students out and doing more remote connectivity. But that comes with challenges in terms of connecting to that university. So the university is good at upgrading their data centers to make sure that their equipment has got a high failover and the like. But when you've got some of the students that are sitting in some of these rural areas, they can't afford the data cards and things like that that are out there. And I think we as an industry, and certainly work that Fibreco is doing at the moment, are looking at trying to connect those areas up at rates that they can actually afford. And I think that by expanding our own networks into those areas and giving high-speed connectivity, I think that at a later stage you will get a commercial take-up of those services. So I think in the beginning you need that social investment, but in longer term I think that we'll be rewarded on a commercial basis as well.
And following on from that, because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there's a social responsibility from all of us in this industry to provide connectivity to as many people as we can. You know, we had the Minister yesterday talking about the role of government. So I guess one question or one final point before we open it up to the lovely folks here. What role of government, because the Minister sat and made a very impassioned speak, he's counting on us to help, he's looking for support, but equally, is he prepared to pay for that support? You know, I mean, you don't get anything for free, and if you do, it's not really worth very much. So I think, is there a play that government needs to help and invest in your businesses, in our businesses, or does it actually just sit back and let us do the investment and then say it's helping the communities by doing limited activities? I mean, Kelvin, you're probably better placed from an NTN perspective in terms of first having a stab at that one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, look, for me, the social responsibility element is something which is high on our agenda. You know, we definitely want to look at some of these public, let's just say, hotspots, or even the schools, the municipal buildings, etc., where we want to actually look at how do we actually drive down the cost and actually enable them with cheaper data services. But in terms of how government can actually assist, if I look at the policies that are out there today, some of the policies actually doesn't really speak to that initiative, and it needs to be reviewed and revised to a larger extent to be able to open up that that opportunity for operators to actually start to look at this more realistically and more honestly to some extent, and really be genuine about the approach we want to take to actually enable the services. So the policy is something which is something I believe that government can actually help in actually facilitating the whole move towards I use the word very guardedly, free type of service that actually helps the people out there.
Yeah. And Simon, I mean, from your model, I mean, you're putting in the big fibre and you're connecting city to city. I mean, government must be, if I was a minister, I'd be falling over myself to talk to you guys and see what I can do in terms of subsidising that, as long as you give an open access network so everybody has ability to tap in.
Absolutely, and I actually see it simpler than policies and things like that. I think that government's got a certain amount of spend that they have on connectivity, and there are certain routes that are just not commercially viable for us to go and roll out fibre on a long-term basis without an anchor tenant. For me, it's a very simple conversation in that they need connectivity in some of these areas. We want to roll out fibre into those areas to be able to provide more connectivity. But if it doesn't make sense on a commercial basis, we're not going to do it. And all it takes is for government to be an anchor tenant on those kind of initiatives. These public-private partnerships absolutely can work, but it needs government to invest in the infrastructure, and I think that they'll see a return on that basis.
Excellent, thanks. So we've got a few minutes, so I thought maybe just wrap up and take some questions. So I mean, really what we're saying is that MTN is going to share everything and converge its network, and we're all going to live happily ever after. So of course we are. So we have 10 minutes. So maybe just invite a few questions. Young man at the front there.
Question for MTN. Historically, MTN has been really, really bad at playing nice with everybody else. Two questions, I suppose, more than anything else. One is, are you actually going to be open access one day and not just say you're open access? And two is, what are you going to do about stuff like OTT services where you're actually putting value on top of the network, which once again you've also been historically really bad at?
Okay, so maybe the first question, in terms of the open access play, it's something we're actually busy with now. I mean, we are an open access player. I guess the extent to which we actually do it, or the speed at which we do it, is something which any operator will experience. It's a brand new, let's just say, initiative for us, in the sense that it's a learning curve. We obviously need to look at how we actually improve on it. But in terms of the OTT players, for us, again, to my earlier point, if it makes business sense for us to actually invest, we'll invest in it. It's all about how do we actually manage that investment to a point where we actually don't erode the value to our shareholders or other stakeholders in that space. So it's about making the investment, but doing it in a manner that actually doesn't actually erode the value.
I think maybe just to support that as well. I mean, if you look at the changing landscape of fibre in South Africa, you know, you go back 3 years ago, there wasn't the Vumatel, the Link Africa, there wasn't the open networks that are going in, building a network and then giving you capacity. I mean, I think that's changed the landscape considerably. You know, I mean, the work that PPC has done with Vumatel, you know, we've probably helped connect over 120,000 customers in 2 years. And a lot of those customers use MTN as a provider on the back of that network. Do you think that's going to drive the incentive more for MTN? Or conversely, if you look at the recent press release from Vodacom, they announced to the world that they've got everything, but actually all they're doing is they're utilizing everybody else's networks, which is, in a way, is open access,
Yes.
but you're not doing the build.
No, 100%. So I think if, you know, the value is there for all the stakeholders, it'll definitely be something that will be embraced and be, a strategy going forward. And to your point, I mean, it's definitely, we're seeing that wave of change coming now. And it's something that will actually just catch on like wildfire.
So you heard it here first, it's going to catch on like wildfire.
Just a comment. Saying you're open access is easy. At what point do you actually say it's not something new? MTN has been saying for close to 2 years that you're an open access operator. Excuse my language, it's time to shit or get off the pot.
I didn't get that. Okay, I didn't get the last part of your... No, I'm joking.
Okay, anybody else wish to ask the panelists anything whilst we're here? Super. In which case, thank you very much. Thank you for listening and have a good afternoon, morning.
Thanks.